welcome to Seen and Heard with Dr. Cathy Wield, a series which explores the life and stories of ex-boarders and how they have fared since leaving school. Whether they have had good, positive or bad and negative experiences of boarding school, everyone has a story to tell. And one thing's for sure, the past has a way of shaping us into the people we are today. Now, Seen and Heard is a committed group of ex-boarding school pupils who understand the unique institutional experience of being raised in these environments and who believe in the power of connection and its ability to heal. I'm an ex-boarder myself and have documented my own recovery journey in my memoir, Unshackled Mind, a doctor's story of trauma, liberation and healing. But today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Penelope Brown. Welcome, Penny. Just as we start, would you like to introduce yourself and give a brief outline of your life so far?
Absolutely, very happy to. So, well, it's nice to see you, Cathy, again. I was born in England, although I do not remember that event, nor do I remember leaving the country. So I sort of became cognizant in Saudi Arabia, where I was locally educated. I think it was a bit hit and miss. I think for some bizarre reason, I was told many years later that my mother tried to homeschool me and it didn't go very well because apparently I couldn't behave myself. Nothing to do with the fact that she had zero teaching qualifications, of course. So went to the local American school and then a few years later, my father lost his job there. So we ended up back in England where, again, we were kept off school, this time for being too advanced. We whatever. And I ended up being put into the same year as my brother. It's all very murky, this whole history of me and my education. And then not long after, we went off to Papua New Guinea, and we were in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. We weren't in the capital, Port Moresby or anything like that. But there was an international school, and we both attended there, which was based on the Australian curriculum, which isn't wildly different to the UK. And I wasn't there very long before I was sent back to England to boarding school, which, I mean, all I knew by that stage was, England was where we came for very brief periods. I wasn't assimilated into this country by any stretch. The only people I knew were my next door neighbour who had similarly aged children. And then, like I say, I was sent from Papua New Guinea, and I don't remember the flight or anything like that. I do remember very vividly that very first day. At some point, I would have been shown around that school because I knew to go up the circular staircase to the dorms, but I don't remember being shown around. I do know my brother had gone off to a different boarding school a term or two ahead, and so we were separated. My parents on the other side of the world. There was no phones. You were never allowed to phone. Obviously there was landlines at the time, but you weren't allowed any kind of contact with your parents. There was Sunday letter writing, and I can only imagine my parents were in Papua New Guinea. It used to take something like 3 months for letters to arrive between the two countries. So I mustn't have had any contact, even indirectly, for that whole first term, which is catastrophic thinking about, what a horrendous separation to put a young person through. And I just feel very sad now that the marketing of boarding school was such that it was prized over everything, and including common sense, and like a lot of expat kids, I know you're an expat kid as well, that, it was deemed that local was vastly inferior levels of sort of academic attainment, that sort of thing. But I was never going to be, an A-star student, I don't think. I always joke that I was educated far beyond my natural capabilities. So although I'm quite bright, I was never, do you know what I mean? I was never destined for high academia. And so that was it. It was hideous. It was an awful place. I remember the uniform was hideous. Really old-fashioned. I remember just being shouted at morning, noon and night. Our lives were dictated by bells. Very quickly, you sort of learnt the system. Looking back, I mean, it's just cruel. Emotional cruelty, I think, is the phrase I've heard about it, because naturally there can be no love in these places because, there's very few adults anyway. I think when I explained to people, I think there was about 200 and something of us in that first boarding school. Very few day kids. And overnight there was 1 or 2 adults in the whole of that Elizabethan building, which in our little vivid imaginations was filled with ghosts. And I've
Right.
since gone on to learn that so many of us have chronic anxiety throughout our lives. And I had it before. I know I definitely had it pre-boarding school, but boarding school certainly did nothing to help
Mm,
that sort of general nervousness and fear I had
mm,
around life.
mm.
And like I say, the memories that if I was going to say like my top 5 memories, being hungry, although I had friends, feeling alone, very conscious of the fact that there's these sort of invisible hierarchies and cliques, and getting on much better with the international students than with the local English girls. Um, I remember, I just remember hating how cooped up we were the whole time. And it was only when I dropped out of the delusion that I actually sat down and sort of wrote it all out, and I realised our lives were in 4 rooms. We had the
Mm.
dormitory, we had the dining room, we had our school room, and the teachers came to us, and then we had the sort of letter writing room, and then
Yeah.
there was church on Sundays. And it's a really small world. And I was lucky enough in the schoolroom, in the most vivid memories, I was in the junior for years, which was in a basement, which makes it even more claustrophobic. It had no natural
Mm.
light. And then when we moved up to the bigger part of the school, the older part, the first year, I remember being sat next to the window and just loving it, but being perpetually told off because I was looking out the window too much.
Yeah.
That need to escape has never left at all.
Right.
That feeling of confinement and
Yeah.
containment has stuck
How
with
old
me
were
all
you
my life.
when you first went?
I'm very hazy. I think it was 8 or 9. Um,
Yeah, 9. Okay.
I'm I really struggle to remember exactly how old I was.
Mm,
And I think I was about 13 when I finally left that school. Um, and it didn't go well. The first sort of year or two, I was eager to please and I was eager to just settle down and get on with it.
mm,
But within a couple of years, I was so damn bored. That there was, and again, it goes back to looking back with hindsight. You're often sent to boarding school because you're told it gives you better opportunities. But we had bugger all by terms of, everything was prescribed down to what we were taught, including our hobbies, and our hobbies were very, very old sort of school Victorian type hobbies like piano playing, embroidery, reading. Once a week there was rounders, very traditional old fashioned type stuff. Um, None of which I had any interest in. There was
mm,
no sort of cultivating the individual. It was very much, here is what you will do, and you will strive to be good at it, whether you are or not, whether you like it or not. There was horse riding that we could go out of school to, and I loved that. And then they, again, it's with the benefit of hindsight. My attitude swung from being compliant and just trying to please and trying to be top of the class, which I was a lot, in every subject, and trying to be that goody two shoes that they desperately craved, and I'd worked that out. It swung to, I don't give a shit. I don't give a toss about this place. When in the course of one term, they changed our riding school, so I lost my favourite pony. My parents left Papua New Guinea under a cloud, so I lost everything, all my cats, dogs,
mm,
horses from there. Um, and my guardians, who had looked after me all those years, emigrated to Australia in the course of 12 weeks. And I now look back and see that as, a huge amount of catastrophic loss for one person to deal with on top of the compounded loss of being sent away. And I just started misbehaving. And obviously they tried all the usual punishments, but I was so indifferent. Do what you like to me. I couldn't care
mm,
less.
mm.
And they ended up putting me, I think it was in the 3rd year at that time, and they ended up putting me in with the juniors to sleep because I was emotionally immature. And, just the cruelty of that. There
Mm,
was no empathy. I was diagnosed with depression by the doctor, and that's how they treated it.
mm.
And that sets you up for a lifetime of thinking you're a wrong 'un, you're bad.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just you that can't get on with this. You can't
yeah.
conform. So anyway, eventually, long story cut short, asked to leave, which I was very happy to hear. My mother was livid, and I, again, couldn't care less. she was like, you were destined to be head girl, and now look at the state of you. And so they sent me off to a former all-boys school, and a very different experience. There was a lot of activities. You had a degree of self-determination in what you pursued. However, it was not orientated to girls at all. It was very much a military, CCF type, rough and tumble type, lots of sport, and, oriented. So there was lots to do, but it was very heavy physical. And I've always been quite good at sort of endurance type things, but they're just not geared up for that sort of thing. Very much the male sports, the powerful sports, that sort of thing. And the army, the CCF, and all of that. So although I was academic, I'd sort of given up, and also it actually was a much better standard of education. So I went from being top of the class all the time to being sort of middle of the road. So that sort of stopped me striving as well. Like, what's the point? Food was a lot better, but again, the quality of life was better. The downside was it had a lot more paedophiles. So, you take your chances. It was a former all-boys school. I think there was about 4 boys to 1 girl. So they weren't geared up for us at all. We had to be little boys, basically, to survive. And obviously, the dormitory time, you were separated by sex. The boys were in the big house, as it were, the big manor, and we were off in little units. So we were done by age as well. So looking back, one of the big influences that has is how ghettoized you are, because it's children bringing up children, which is a phrase I'd never heard until I sort of dropped out of the delusion. And I thought, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what the problem is there's no one teaching you life skills. It's just do your GCSEs or whatever. And then the rest of it, figure it out for yourself. And those soft skills like negotiation, practical skills like how to, I don't know, change a light bulb, pay a bill, change the car tire, deal with a crisis on those everyday sort of problems that you would experience in a family situation, and you'd watch how they solve the problem, we're cut off from. So came out clueless, really.
Right. So you came out when?
So I came out at 16, and again asked to leave because my behaviour was not acceptable. By then I was smoking. I wasn't a big drinker. There was a lot of drink actually at school, but I never really got into it. I hated feeling out of control at that point. But I smoked a lot. I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less about authority. Like, what can you seriously? Once you're a child that's lost everything, what can anybody actually really do to you? So I left, and then I went to the local international school in Southern Africa, where my parents had moved to. But again, I had problems adjusting because, just my parents had separated at this point, just as I arrived. Like, hello, family. Oh, we're not.
So that didn't really give you any reprieve?
Not at all. Not at all. And very quickly I moved in with a boyfriend. So, and it's that hyper independence, that who needs parents anyway?
Yeah. So you did your A levels?
I did the international baccalaureate, as it were.
Oh, okay.
And then moved to England because my parents then actually enacted the divorce. They'd been separated for a few years and it was pretty hideous. And then he stayed behind. She moved to England. And I think some of her bitterness stemmed from the fact that I wouldn't settle at this, the school wouldn't take me back. They didn't want to send me to a third boarding school because I wasn't going to settle there anyway. And I think she had that resentment that if it wasn't for you, I could have left this man 2 years earlier. You know what I mean? It was just like, okay, so it's all, so there's a lot for me to internalize. And of course, she was an absolute, emotional wreck when she got to England, which I didn't really appreciate at the time. Nor, teenagers aren't really that self-aware anyway, but still dealing with my own emotional baggage and not having the skills to really deal with that. So, got a job, saved up, went off to university a year later, which my parents refused to pay for. I did international business. Because I just wanted to go overseas again. I just wanted to travel. I just did not want to be in this country at all. It was grey. It was miserable. And now I can see that's just, an old resentment. I just desperately did not want to be in this country at all. And then went off travelling the world again.
And I mean, you were quite successful, weren't you, in terms of your business career?
I wish I was more successful than my bank account indicates. I did. I got some highly commended pieces of work done overseas, as it were. But again, I always felt like an imposter. I felt, and this is something that's followed me around my whole life. I've never felt like I'm authentically living my life. I always feel like I'm living somebody else's, and anything good that happens is either an accident. It's just happenstance. It's not anything I've earned or deserved. So I struggle to take praise, and the other thing, which I think probably a lot of exporters are probably used to, is when you get praise, you feel manipulated. You feel like, ooh, now they're going to want something from me. It's like, because we were such slippery, manipulative, strategic people. I think that's what Nick Duffel calls us, and I can really see that today. So yeah, I'd internalized that work hard. I was thinking about this today. I got, in the course of my career, I picked up 3 degrees, 2 masters and a basic, and and I had that whole workaholism going on. That attention seeking, that approval seeking. Never did it for myself. Did it because I thought it was the right thing to do, and I had no sense of a work-life balance. I played hard, I worked hard, and over the years, drinking then became my only way of switching off, which I now know is pretty common amongst the exporting clients.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
interesting to hear you. At the beginning, you said you weren't academic and you were never going to be an A-star pupil, and yet, actually, you achieved very successfully.
and I think
And I mean, it's funny that even now you struggle to be able to appreciate perhaps quite
that's
how
it.
well
Once
you
I
did.
was able to self-determine as much as I thought I
Mm,
was, I didn't find it difficult to get A stars, because I still
yeah,
believe that was, so I've got all these, ridiculous qualifications with
yeah,
very high grades. But they don't, that's where it was the wrong message. There was nothing holistic about my
mm,
upbringing at all. It was just go
mm,
and get the grades and be grateful for it. And
mm,
actually, it's rubbish that if you work hard, you will get there, or, it's going to
mm,
get you success or whatever. It's the biggest lie that we were sold, because the
yeah,
happiest people have generally got a good balance of work and play and rest.
yeah. I mean, I certainly think from hearing your story and knowing a bit about you that you've achieved amazing feats, haven't you? Um,
I have, but I think it's all linked back to, my comfort zone is being in an anxious living environment. So things like,
mm,
I walked across America in 2020 on my own, and people go, oh, wow, you're so brave. But how do you compare that to being 8 or 9 years old and flying from England to Papua New Guinea on your own? It's same.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
that being in an extremely vulnerable, scary situation for us is normal. And
mm,
boarding school was, day in, day out, having to
mm,
watch your step and be hyper vigilant and not
yeah,
put a foot wrong, because you're going to get yelled at. Or,
yeah,
especially in all girls environments, they can be pretty
mm,
vicious for
mm,
you not knowing something or saying the wrong thing or thinking the wrong thing.
mm,
And that all feeds into that, not just never being comfortable in my own skin, really.
yeah. So
Um,
tell us a
mm.
little bit about that feat of endurance, your persevering during the pandemic and your walk
Yes.
across America.
I mean, I loved it and loathed it at the same time. It was hard work. I mean, I was walking up to,
So tell our listeners just a bit from the
So
start how.
so I, like everybody else, I watched the film Wild with Reese Witherspoon under duress. I hasten to add. My friend forced me to watch it, and me being arrogant, because she'd walked 6 miles that first day, and me being arrogant, saying, "Oh God, anyone could do that." And in the film, she walks about 1,000 miles. It's not sort of heavily hit home that she actually walked the so-called easier sections, albeit nothing about what she did was easy. I now know. There
Across
was a little
America.
bit across America. So I started at the Mexican border,
Yeah,
and then there's a big wall, and
yeah,
so you know which way is south. So you turn around and you face north, and off you go. And there's a little path that takes you all the way up to the Canadian border. Lots of other paths interlink it. So occasionally, or very often, I'd take the wrong one. And it's 2,653 miles door to door, not including walking on and off the trail to get resupply, or getting lost as I did for a half a day once.
So did you just decide to do it all of a sudden? What?
It was one of those one of those, you sort of got to believe in the impossible to understand why or how it happened. I watched the film Wild, very arrogantly said, "Oh, we could all do that," because she only walks 6 miles in a day. And then just really taken with her story. So sort of didn't realise that, and learned lots of things about the Pacific Crest House. So you know how algorithms work. I'm in the bath one day and a video pops up, how to apply for a PCT permit. Well, I didn't even know you needed a permit to walk this damn thing. More to the point, I had no ambition to walk it. I was just generally, learning more about it. I'm one of those, I go down rabbit holes. I learn something I don't know and I've got to know everything. And this video popped up. And it was like, how to apply for a PCT permit. And it turned out that day was the only day that year you can apply. And so it was like, oh, this is a bit spooky. So I rushed upstairs and did the application window opens for 2 hours that evening. And I was in the bath early evening. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to just see what this is like.
You're applying for the Pacific Crest Trail.
Naked. And you have to do 3 like little mini courses before, like fire regulations and all sorts of other things. And then you get put in this lottery, and 2 hours later I've got this golden ticket. And I was like, well, how the hell did that happen? And then you've got 6 months then to just panic. And I was like, I didn't even plan to do this.
Okay.
But hey,
obviously was it funny?
So this particular event is 2019, and my ticket started, my golden ticket was for 2020.
Yeah.
And bizarrely, I thought, you know what, I'm going to just do this. I've got enough money in the bank at the moment. I can afford to do it. I'll do it. Not knowing a pandemic was on the horizon. So I literally flew to America just as the pandemic was starting, and a week into walking, everything shut down. I thought, well, I'm here now. I'm in the wilderness. I'll stay. But just to make this a bit more woo, the guy whose video I'd watched about how to apply for a permit was in front of me at the queue for immigration into America. Amazing. I was like, it's all And then as I started walking, about 4 days into the trip, I actually crossed paths with him, and he was, he was like a hiking whatever influencer, so he was all over YouTube. And he quit like 3 weeks into the trip, and I obviously persevered and made it the whole way to Canada. About 100 of us that year did. It was miserable. It was everything. It was awful, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat.
And you wrote a book about your experiences.
Yes, which is Everything You Ever Taught Me by Person Irresponsible. So I wrote the book when I came back during the second part of the English lockdown and that sort of thing. So that's another accomplishment. And in a way, looking back and even reading back at my notes, and because I took a little laptop with me, and so I wrote 1,000 words every night, and largely it was about how I was feeling, what I was thinking, what the terrain did, what had nearly killed me that day. And I remember in the book I just put this thing about I'd gone to boarding school, and in my notes, I don't actually think it made the book, I was talking to a guy called Jeff towards the end. I said, very casually, I said, I went to boarding school, and he went, oh my God, that's dreadful. I am so sorry. And I remember being really stunned at his reaction, like he was absolutely broken on my behalf, that this was a terrible thing to do to a person, which of course is not ever how people respond in the UK.
In this country,
you either get the sort of sarcastic, or people just go, oh, I wish I'd gone to boarding school. So there's an envy, or there's a disdain, but not in a poor you sympathy context. It's very much contempt. And I remember being really struck by how appalled he was by this concept of boarding school. But even despite all that thinking time, because that's all you can do day in, day out, I never really realised just how profound boarding school, the impact of being sent away was, until about 2023. That's when I dropped out of the delusion very powerfully in the course of 24 hours, and suddenly went, whoa, it really screws you up.
So what provoked that sudden, I love your terminology, dropped out of the delusion. It's absolutely brilliant. But
one thing I've learned since, before I explain how I dropped out, because it's a very profound moment, since then I have talked to hundreds of ex-boarders, some still in the delusion, some coming out of the delusion, and some very much out of the delusion. And all of us thought we were the only one. All of us thought I was the only one that really didn't settle. I was just putting on an act. I was just trying to muddle through.
Yeah.
None of us learnt, strategic personality. None of us learnt all these highfalutin terms. We just all thought it just wasn't quite for me. Didn't really like it. Felt very lonely. Yes, I had friends, but it all seemed very superficial. Like, none of us had the language. It's only now that I can look back and with my sort of educational hat on, I can say children are all about likes and feels and feelings. That's what they talk about. And when you are sent away to boarding school, it's not just that you lose your parents or your pets or your bedroom or your books or your toys. You lose all of those things as well, and your sense of safety and your sense of trust and faith. That's all stripped out of you. You also lose your ability to articulate how you think and feel, because it's not welcomed. So at that point that you are sent away, that development just pretty much stops. And that's why you hear people, if you say to them, how was boarding school? I love it. I loved it. And you're like, well, that's not really quite a normal response for an English person. You could say to someone, oh, you just bought a new house. How is it? Oh, yeah, it's all right. Oh, you just had your first child. How is she? Yeah, she's all right. I hear you went to boarding school. I loved it. And you're like, it's a really odd reaction when you think about it, and it's because we've got stuck at that point, love and hate, and those very hyperbolic terms. And so that's the big thing that they strip out of you. So what dropped me out of the delusion was I've been in recovery for quite a number of days now. I crashed and burned when I was 40 with alcohol, and I went to that well-known top of the alphabet organisation. I didn't try anything else, so I can't tell you anything about anything else. But I do know that I went to that particular well-known one, and I still go now, and I've been going ever since. And so in 2023, I was travelling around England, and so I'm going to different meetings all over. And I happened to be up in the north of England, and I went to a meeting there, and there were 6 of us that night. And for some reason, every meeting's different, no two are the same. But this one, it was like, we paid for an hour and a half, so we're going to stay for an hour and a half. Whereas normally with a meeting, you're like, we've all had our turn, let's go home now. And the meeting might only last 45 minutes. But I was there were 6 of us, we'd been around, we talked about alcohol and our lives and blah, blah, blah. And then it went back to the first person. He said, I went to boarding school, and what happened to me there was criminal. He said, I wasn't sexually abused, but it was just brutal, just nothing about it is okay. And he sort of talked a little bit about, his hatred of boarding school as a concept and blah, blah, blah. And the next person came and he said, I went to boarding school. And it was just like, And then the third person's time to talk, I went to boarding school. And I'm like, oh. And then the fourth person said, I went to boarding school. And there was 6 of us there that night. I was the 5th person in the order to speak. And I said, I went to 2 boarding schools. First one was freaking dreadful, and the second one was okay. And I, sort of talked about the differences between the two. And then the 6th person said, well, I didn't go to boarding school, so bloody drunk. But I left thinking, what are the odds? What are the odds of going to a random meeting where we're all there because we've had problems with alcohol, and 5 of the 6 of you have been to boarding school? And literally, that was the first thought I had the next day. Like, this is really peculiar. And then I just listed all the people I knew that I was really good friends with that had also been to boarding school that I'd met via that organisation. And I ran out of fingers and toes quite quickly. And I'd always just assumed, well, I'm in the Cotswolds. What do you expect? Part of the scene. And then very quickly sort of Googled something like, how many children go to boarding school? And it was like 0.5% of the population. And it was like, well, the odds are just getting more and more bizarre here. Like, we're so overrepresented. And I only know about this one recovery system. There's plenty others.
Yeah.
And then that got me to Nick Duffel's book. So I'm listening to that as I'm driving around thinking, oh, things are like, and all of a sudden, every memory that I'd ever had about the place that had been suppressed I never talked about it. I never thought about it. Everything went into Technicolor. I could have all sorts of memories pop up, unwanted memories. I could smell the place. I could feel the place. Sensation overload. And within a couple of weeks, I had a massive depression.
Yeah.
And rang a therapist and said, I really need to talk. I really need to talk about what happened to me as a child.
Yeah.
And make sense of it.
And you've been doing that, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
For
me, the book that made the biggest impact was Joyce Sharon's The ABCD, because as soon as I had that, the sense of abandonment, the bereavement, because homesickness doesn't even touch the sides of what we go through. Confinement, containment, that fear of authority, fear of being controlled, and disassociation. That took me a lot longer to understand that side of things. But all of a sudden, as soon as I had that ABC, I was just like, oh my God, my whole life I've spent running away from my childhood. I didn't have a particularly bad time, at boarding school. I wasn't viciously bullied or anything like that. I could fight my own corner, but just that. And then started doing like workshops with other people and started talking to other ex-boarders and really looking into, oh my God, and then, did a whole load of workshops with therapists and ex-boarders coming together just to show, because I've been in that therapy plenty of times over the years. Nobody ever asked me, what was boarding school like for you? And if they'd asked me, I said, fine. Fine.
Yeah. It's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, have you any thoughts about how society as a whole might make provision for kids like us? I mean, both of your parents and mine were overseas, and I mean, mine were lucky. Well, they thought they were lucky because they were going to get their kids' school fees paid by the government. And they thought they were giving us this fantastic chance. And whether or not your parents had a similar sort of viewpoint, I don't know. But what do you think we should do for these children?
Well, that's a brilliant question. Just to rewind, when I was 19 and we'd just come back to the UK, my mother had said to her sister in my presence, oh, even if we hadn't travelled, I'd still have sent my children to boarding school. And I remember feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Because I'd always justified that I'd had to tolerate boarding school because of our international lifestyle. But missing the obvious point that when we went back for the holidays, my mother had to find us friends to hang out with, because obviously you don't make them. You've got to basically, your parents, even when you're a teenager, are setting you up on play dates. It's the maddest thing. All these children were being educated locally. So there was no reason at all. So they bought into marketing. And the marketing is, we will get your kid better grades than they would ordinarily get if left to their own devices. A lot of the marketing currently is, we will do the discipline side, which we know you find so hard. We will take away their phones. We will be these bad eggs in their life so that they are free to love you even more. That's a lot of the marketing right now. And the other thing, the pastoral care, which really makes me feel sick, because they're really aiming at they're sort of aiming at the send market, and saying, the special educational needs, we can give you tailored one-to-one treatment for your child. So that, that all speaks to a parent who will be worried about these things. And it's really working on their fear. And it's not actually saying, by the way, it needs to be like a cigarette packet. By the way, yes, you're going to really love smoking, but it is going to slowly kill you. Yes, there's going to be elements of boarding school that your child really likes, but it's also going to slowly kill them, because the chances of them coming out with drink, drug, or another ism is very, very, very high. Life expectancy, especially for one study that I came across recently, expat kids like us, they reckon it costs us 10 to 15 years of our life because of the stress. So like, thanks for that. Glad I got you the lead ring, but you took 10 years of my life off me for it. So, a couple of other things. I'm probably the only person with a load of other ex-boarders delighted with the 20% VAT from boarding school. Primarily for two reasons. One is it's going to reduce the numbers significantly, and has done thus far, as they're all going to the wall. And secondly, the thing that makes me most sick about the current setup with boarding schools is a third of the kids there are of foreign nationals. So they are plucked from their culture and everything that they know and is familiar, a lot of the time not even speaking much English, and then put in who would send their child to China aged 8, 9, 10 for an opportunity? It's just nuts. And yet our boarding schools are, to keep themselves alive, they are making something that is utterly abhorrent, utterly immoral, and doing that to kids. It's child abuse. And I don't, because they're foreign doesn't mean it's any less abusive. It's just sheer child trafficking as far as I'm concerned. And it's disgusting. So I'm very happy with the 20% VAT. And I would love to, And I'm very happy that we are getting better at speaking out. We've had some really big names, like I don't know, Charles Spencer's spoken out. A lot of very famous people, like your James Blunt, those sort of people, they never speak positively about their boarding school. So, the whole excuse of, the British can't afford boarding school anymore. And it's like, well, actually, there's an awful lot that can, but they have got some awareness now that they're not great places. Although they still, a lot of the time, they're still in that delusion. I remember listening to an interview with James Blunt, and he was saying things like, the problem is I love my children too much. It's not that they couldn't hack it, but I just love them too much. And it's like, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
There's something wrong there. We don't send children to school so they can hack things. That's not the point of them, but very telling. And also, it's not a bad thing if you love your kids.
No. Yeah.
Because most of us leave boarding school feeling very unlovable and very unloved, because we were unloved, because the only people that are showing you love generally were the teachers with bad intent. And that's not, that's
no, absolutely not.
Yeah. So, the message is getting out there, but there's a lot of work to be done. I know I get very frustrated. I'm actually in a boarding school recovery group at the moment, which is a very closed group, and they're all just coming out of the delusion. And they're experiencing firsthand how, if you ever try to talk about it, people silence you very quickly. So the minute you say, I wish I went to boarding school, they will interrupt with, I wish I'd gone to boarding school, which straight away, you're like, no, you really don't. And but they'll launch into all the reasons why they wish they had gone without ever asking you, what's it like? What's it really like? So that's strategy, the most common strategy. And the second thing is, it's just still seen as a privilege, and so you're just seen as whinging and self-pitiful. And so you have to kind of be a bit bolshy. So even at the weekend, I was with a group, and I just made some remark about, I can't remember what it was. And somebody straight away jumped in, it always comes back to boarding school with you. And I just remember thinking, you wouldn't say that to anyone else. If someone else had a traumatic childhood, you would say, it always comes back to your mother. You just wouldn't say that sort of stuff. So you do feel very silenced. And I just turned and I thought, actually, I'm going to bite into this. Not retaliate, but I'm just going to say, they're really awful places. Imagine it's care. It's just care.
Yeah.
And you don't sit there and say, you're being self-pitiful. Oh, you brought up in care. Oh, get over it. It was a privilege. Don't you know how lucky you were? You had so many adults in your life. You got such a generous allowance from the government that you were spoilt with all these school trips, and extra holiday things. You just don't go there. But for some reason, boarding school, people can and do. So it's slow and it's painful. I mean, I always think we're second wave, really. The Joyce Chevalier and Nick Duffels of this world that really put their head above the parapet and started must have felt like they were pushing water uphill the whole time. More and more and more of us are standing up and saying, actually, they're dreadful places. Please close them down, and thank you for 20% back. Could you not make it 25?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing which I've heard you have quite a lot of passion around women and girls in general, and in particular in the boarding school space. Do you want to talk a little bit about why we need to be really mindful about the experience of women and girls?
Absolutely. So when you first start looking into it, as so many, when some think, you get that sort of curiosity. Some people get that curiosity, and they start to think, maybe boarding school harmed me, or maybe I want to just understand how it's impacted my life. And you are just then confronted with a wall of male experiences, and they're pretty much, it's almost going to be violence and sexual abuse as the top themes. If you've been to an all-girls boarding school, those aren't the top themes. They're not violent places. They're psychologically violent, but they're not physically violent places. And the rates of paedophilia in all-girls schools are much, much, much lower. And paedophilia, you've got to remember, with the boarding school system, it's not just masters on students. Far, far more common is older boys on younger boys, or older boys on girls. And so they might be 18 with a 13-year-old. There's a big age gap. And certainly when I was at the second boarding school, right through to more recently, there's always been that, older men with younger girls has never been a taboo at all. So, those are the top themes that you come across. So as a woman or as a girl, you're going to be like, well, those two things didn't happen to me, so therefore my experience isn't bad enough. And you never, it's changing the last couple of years, but prior to the last couple of years, there's just nothing that really looks at, well, what are the unique features of being a girl or a woman that boarding school sort of does or does not deal with. And so one, they're very shame-based cultures, much more shame-based than, everyday life. So one thing I've noticed is women that have gone to boarding school, and you and I are the same here, we don't wear makeup. We just don't.
I know.
Don't wear any makeup. And virtually everybody I know that's been to boarding school does not wear makeup at all. So all of those teenage years and that teenage bonding that you would do where you're doing each other's hair or playing and experimenting, and it never happens. So you always feel like you're playing dress up with your mother's makeup if you ever put, and don't like the feel of it on our skin, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So there's that sense of being a little bit boyish or not being feminine enough for society, that can really actually eat away at your self-esteem. And the other thing is being hyper independent. There's this thing that, it's not rewarded in society if you're a girl. You're expected to be a little bit, especially in our age group, I think it's probably a little bit different in 2025, but when we were coming out, I've been attacked my whole life for being too independent. And it's that whole classic thing, men are assertive, girls are bossy, and men are men and girls are girls, and so having gone to a formal boys' school, I came out with very male traits, which are then used against me because I speak authoritatively. I don't speak femininely, and I don't play the whole girly game because I see it as a girly game. When in actual fact, I just don't behave with typical female traits. Girly game is a great example of shaming, isn't it? So I've just illustrated that whole point. And being ambitious, I had the same ambitions that boys do, but it's just not rewarded in females as much. And it, so those are the sort of things that you just didn't learn. And you and I were both in the Boarding on Insanity documentary, and we did the retreat together. At the end of it, I felt a little bit uncomfortable when people were saying, what is it that we've missed out on in life? And eventually somebody said, we've lost the feminine, we've lost the mother figure, and we never get our mums back. And I remember feeling really distinctly uncomfortable because all the men were identifying this, and I was thinking, it doesn't quite catch my experience. And then I realised that's because you're men and you're missing your mum. But we lost in two avenues. We lost the mother figure. We lost that person who would have educated us on being women in a man's world, in a patriarchy situation. So we never got to hear what real life was like from a woman's perspective. And simple things are, I've gone through the menopause now. My friend is going through it. She's got 2 teenage daughters. So they hear us making the odd quip about hot flushes and body changes. It's very much like the universe of being a teenager. So it's that accidental learning about womanhood from observation and overhearing and being able to ask questions, or us explaining, wait till this happens to your body. And, all those little things that would help you through that process, we're shut away from. And it's really then that sort of spark. The other thing that we lose is our ability to be mothers. So a lot of ex-boarding women are child-free or childless. You can choose your own thing there because connotations. And that's because, and I'm convinced it's because we weren't mothered. We don't know how to mother, so we just don't bother. And then a lot of people I do know that went to boarding school, they have that massive crisis of confidence when their child becomes the same age that they were sent away, and and that does a lot of, psychologically, there's a lot of questioning goes on, and a lot of, that's when they tend to sort of really become, they go into therapy at that point. And of course therapists just don't question it. They just don't make the link between the boarding school, and so we just don't get well looked after at all. So the girls at boarding school, it's not well represented in literature, and some of the themes are only just starting to be explored. But the thing that I'm really conscious of is it's very much a shame-based society. I think a lot of us left feeling very, eating disorders are pretty rife. anxiety, depression, mental health, absolutely, and that you just carry them on forever. And you're just seen as being too emotional or too hormonal and very dismissed and minimized. And given that women, we're supposed to be much more au fait with our emotions and feelings and able to talk about them, much more free to talk about them. Of course, our experiences have cut us off from that as well. So it's very, very hard to talk. It's been very hard for me to learn to talk about my emotions publicly with others.
Yeah.
And still is.
I mean, you've done amazingly in the way, actually in such a short time, you've come through and identified exactly where the problems lay.
I was lucky in many respects because I'm in a 12-step fellowship. And once I dropped out the delusion, and there was a meeting that I was going to regularly, and I just felt so silenced. Somebody came up and said, you've got to just remember how lucky you were. And it was just, I felt so, and I saw somebody else roll their eyes when I sort of tried to talk about it. And then somebody else said, oh, you changed the way you talk at meetings. And that for me was not helpful. So I stopped going to that meeting. I was, and I still am going to an all women's meeting that I helped set up with a fellow exporter, actually. And our ethos for setting it up, or the ethos we wanted to cultivate, was so that we could actually talk about recovery and womanhood and how it impacts our lives on a day-to-day basis. Because you've got a lot of mothers with children who've obviously lost their children through alcoholism. And they're still taboo subjects, even within AA. So we set that up. And once I'd come back from the meeting up north, it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, so I've had this really weird experience where I went to a meeting and there's 5 out of 6 of us went to boarding school. I think there was 12 women that night and 6 put their hands up and went, us 2. And so it gave me that safe space to go, I'm going through this and I'm learning this. And you could see the 6 women there, or, the other people kept, because it changes every day, not necessarily the same people. People would be really listening in because it was like, you've tapped into something that no one's ever had, talked into. From that, other women were then able to go and get a bit of therapy because, the 12-step fellowships can only take you so far. It can't do that. But I was lucky in that I had that space to talk and talk about just, the depression that followed, really, because it was pretty dark when once I woke up. I immediately just felt so overwhelmed emotionally, so grief-stricken is probably the word. And very lucky that at the time I could just about afford a bit of therapy. So, I just found a boarding school therapist, and she had to be female, and she had to have gone to boarding school. And I found her, and I wrote and I said, I don't know if you've got space, but I desperately need to talk to somebody who has been through it. Because at that point, I didn't even have the language to talk. I needed her to give me the words to go, that's it. That's how it is. And she was the one that said, it's children bringing up children. Now let's explore what that actually means for a child. And me going, everything makes sense. You've got the socially inept bringing up the socially inept and then expecting us to be well adjusted at the end of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the person who really validated me was actually an American therapist. And she was the one who immediately spotted it within, a very short space of time. And then later just kept saying, you never had any role models growing up.
No.
And yet, her validation was not without challenge. And she did actually say, you have a choice where to go with this. And I'm really glad, even though it seemed a little bit harsh at the time, that, it wasn't just, oh, poor you. There was actually encouragement to use that amazing innate ability and within all of us, our resilience, which as boarding school survivors, we have a bucket load of resilience.
We do, but that can also mean you put up and suffer too much.
Yeah, we do.
And I look back and I had a pretty horrible marriage, and I put up and suffered for way too long because I didn't have any capacity to advocate for myself. And just didn't have the skill set to advocate for myself. So that goes back to why walking across America was so great because it's like, it's resilience. It's what I do best. but I also do suffering so damn well as well.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
and it goes back to people go, oh wow, but actually it's very much a boarding school trait that one of the things I learnt was the adverse childhood experiences, and we can't do that questionnaire because it assumes you're brought up in your home. But once you change the
Yeah.
wording slightly, and then you look at your outcomes, which is smoking, drinking, heart disease, extreme sports, divorce. There's, I think, 10 possible wonderful outcomes. And the more of these childhood experiences are, the more your susceptibility to adult adverse experiences are. And I score 8 out of 10 once you change, and you think what is called your parents. And so so no wonder I'm a bit of a basket case at times.
So you are where you are now, and are you able to appraise yourself in a way that you can actually see good in the future?
It's good days and bad. Nothing. I
Yeah.
still have, because it's also inner, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you're sent away to boarding
Yeah.
school, you have to become very internalized because there's nothing safe about showing things outwardly. No one's there to listen to you. No one's there to help you process. So, I still have days when I feel like a ginormous failure, never good enough, an absolute idiot, very isolated. And I was thinking just before, one of the things is, just having to guess at what normal is and never feeling like I deserve normal, but at the same time not wanting normal. So I always feel like in a state of conflict. And some days, I feel the benefit of all the work that I've done, and other days I'm as lost as I've ever been. So it's trying to get that sort of consistency that you're more well-adjusted and well-rounded than not. But it's the most healthy I ever feel is when I'm in, talking to other ex-boarders, because it's being able to talk authentically. When you're talking to non-ex-boarders, I still feel like I'm being prejudged and that I'm moaning or whinging. And I feel very dismissed, so I still got that strategic, who do I talk to about what, so nobody ever gets to see the full spectrum of me, as it were. I still very guarded, and that sort of thing. So work in progress, because and just those old value system, you're only judged by how much money you have in the bank, but I don't have a great deal at the moment, so I'm feeling particularly happy. So but at the same time, I've been bouncing around the country for a few years now with my van and my cat, and absolutely having a whale of a time. But undercut all of that is that feeling of we must not have fun. We should not be having fun.
Right.
So, that self-sabotaging can never just be in the present moment and enjoy life for life's sake, is always a bit of a battle. There's always that gnawing, I should be doing better, I should be doing something else. Which I'm working on it. I'm working on it. But it's not, once you've seen it, it's very hard to unsee it. So it's all got to be processed, really.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I think you've been, very authentic, which you always are, and that's one of the things which I really value, particularly about the ex-boarding school community. Those who've come through and recognised the damage tend to be really authentic. Whereas I've also noticed that those who are still thinking it was a really good thing for themselves tend to have a sort of superficial, I don't know, maybe that's very judgmental of me.
It's back to the strategic personality, isn't it? We all have to survive a very dysfunctional childhood, because it is dysfunctional. And it's whether you're ready to break that self-protection. It's just denial, to use everyday language.
It is.
And that becomes your family, for some people, and it becomes a big part of their identity. So for them, it's like anybody that's a victim of abuse. It takes years before you suddenly go, do you know, I don't think what happened to me was okay. But until you start asking the questions, you're not going to get the honest answers. So people who who got through it and survived it and potentially, ticked all the boxes and got all the approval that they needed from it, was still, it's like anything else. It's too threatening to face up to. And you wouldn't go to somebody and say, you know what, I think your parents are really dysfunctional. I think you had a really shitty childhood. You just don't go up to people and say that. So there's no point going up to a boarder and saying, I think your child was a bit dysfunctional. That does not, unless you're ready to actually go, actually, I am divorced. I do struggle with eating disorders or drinking disorders or sex disorders or gambling disorders or shopping disorders, I have anxiety. I've had big bouts of depression in my life. Until you're really ready to say, here's my pockets of vulnerability, and go and have a need to go and look for them. It's big birthdays and life experiences might force you into therapy. But one of the weaknesses in that system is therapists don't get boarding school. And when I did the workshops, I brought together therapists and explorers and just showed the therapists how to get the boarding school people to talk. Because if you ask them how it was, they'll say fine. But if you say, tell me about sleeping at boarding school, they'll be able to start telling you about some very traumatic events in a really matter-of-fact way. Because they'll tell you with emotion. And they'll tell you oftentimes with humour. Oh, I remember this one time. And then they'll tell something bloody awful that probably didn't happen to them, happened to somebody and they were witness to it.
Yeah.
And that's when the therapists suddenly go, oh, these are buildings of trauma, of violence, albeit or shame or punishment. And that's when they get to know, okay, don't ask them how boarding school was. Ask them about sleeping. Ask them about dormitory arrangements. Ask them about food. Ask them about clothing. Ask them about politics. And they'll get a peek into how absent normal life was for these kids.
No, I agree.
And that's what I did. So when you go off for therapy, 9 times out of 10, and all of the therapists I've spoken to said they don't even ask on their intake forms, did you go to boarding school? They all changed that once they,
that's good, Penny. I mean, you've made a huge difference there, and I agree. I mean, I spent years before, when I was supposedly having therapy for depression, when actually nobody was acknowledging the root cause. And nobody actually talked about that. It was again the American therapist who immediately recognized, for instance, for me, being in hospital was just like being in boarding school again. And nobody talked. What was it like sleeping in a dormitory? Oh, you're sleeping in a dormitory again. Oh, how wonderful. Let's just re-traumatize you. So you're completely right to actually be very specific about asking questions about daily life, which for us was completely outside the experience of people who live at home with their parents.
Where I show them a clip, and it's the leaving school at 8, and these little 8-year-old girls. It's one of the very few bits of boarding school literature that focuses on girl experience. And it's a co-ed prep school. And the girls, they're all having dinner, and there's loads of teachers and housemasters coming in. And they're saying, we're going to go swimming tonight. And all the children go, yay! Because they're being busy, so they can't think. Because it's that first night. And I say, can you imagine going to a child who has just lost their home, their pets, their parents, in a house fire, and then saying, we're going swimming tonight, kids? That'll make it okay.
Yeah.
And that's when I think it suddenly twigs like, oh my God, you must not feel, you must not think. Because if that child is allowed to behave like a normal child, they'd suddenly go, I've lost my mum, I've lost my cat, I've lost my dog, I've lost my bedroom, I've lost my toys. And now in the morning, the strange man's going to come in and open the curtains after years of being told about stranger danger. And that's the bit when they just go, oh my God, you've just made black into white. And it's like, everything this child is feeling and thinking is that the message is don't. You're the opposite of what's instinctive to you. So if you're not allowed your own intuition, that's what they really take from you. You're left at best guessing what good life looks like.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking because, I think you have a tremendous story to tell, and what you're saying is going to be learning material for other people.
Mm.
Um, and I hope that a lot of therapists listen to this.
Yeah.
I think it's great teaching material for them as well.
That's it. I'm
Um,
hoping to run another course in January, but nothing's set in stone yet. But I will certainly keep going with it because I think it's something I can do. And January I've got nothing else on, so I'll try and do something then. And it's just like a half-day session. Normally I charge around 45 quid, but prices can vary. Just to help people really see what happened to them as kids. And then, especially if you're already in therapy, and that's the key thing, is a lot of people come and they say, I'm already in therapy, but this gives me the language to start to talk about it. We don't have the language, and therein lies the problem. We don't have the ability to talk about it, and we need permission to now.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. And I'm going to say bye to everybody, and we'll see you next time on one of these podcasts.